And for insight into the Ankara bombing and the tensions between Turkey and its Kurdish minority, we're joined by Bulent Aliriza. He's the founding director of the Turkey Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome back to the show. You know, when Ankara was hit just a few weeks ago, you predicted that it would happen again. And here we are, 37 dead, Kurdish minorities being accused of this act. Are we seeing a new normal in Turkey?
I fear that may well be the case. This is the third attack in Ankara. There was the one in February, the one that you mentioned, and there was an earlier one in October, again with a suicide bomber. So we've had three major attacks in the capital of the Turkish Republic within 5 months. So I think that there is a pattern, and it testifies to the growing terrorist threat to Turkey emanating from not just the PKK, which it seems likely the Turkish government will accuse yet again of being behind this attack, but also from ISIS, because Turkey is playing host to American planes and other allied planes, which are hitting ISIS targets beyond its border in Syria.
Turkey is responding to this latest attack by striking back. There were airstrikes in the country, also in Iraq. Is this creating a cycle of unrest?
Well, yes. I mean, we can say that the ongoing war in Syria, which is now, I think, in its 6th year, is beginning to spill over the border into Turkey. Now, Turkey has been attacking PKK targets within its borders all the way back to 1984 when the struggle with the PKK terrorism began. But it's also been striking against PKK targets in northern Iraq, where the PKK is based. But added to that, more recently, have been Turkish attacks on PYD positions, YPG positions, to use the other acronym, which are the Syrian Kurdish organizations' positions within Syria. So Turkey is involved in fighting against the PKK within its borders, in Iraq and Syria. So we can actually talk about the growing instability that it's afflicting Turkey within and without.
But how did they get to the point where they were not too long ago, where there was a period of peace, there was a ceasefire? We don't see that anymore. But what will it take to get there again? Well,
the trouble with situations like this is that it has a momentum of its own. As your reporter said, security forces have lost a number of its personnel in the fight. Once you get to a certain point, your military objectives seem to grow. And Turkey wants to finish off the PKK threat once and for all. Now, that has eluded the successive Turkish governments for decades. The question is whether there will be further escalation or whether miraculously we'll be able to return to the status quo before July, when there were no killings and no outrages of this kind. But it has to be remembered that it's not just the PKK threat, as I said, that Turkey is facing. Even if that was to be eradicated somehow, there would still be the threat from the Islamic State, which one should not ignore.
Turkish government obviously stretched right now. This is just one of many things it's dealing with. Where does it begin?
Well, we haven't yet talked about the millions of refugees. 2.5 million are in Turkey, and 1 million have gone through Turkey to Europe. The Turks and the Europeans are talking about how to deal with this issue. Then there's the whole issue of the Syrian civil war and how it comes to an end. There is peace talks that are beginning. The Turks have ensured that the Syrian Kurds are not participating, but the Syrian Kurds are fighting alongside U.S. special forces and are being backed by Russia as well. So there are lots and lots of complications that Turkey has to deal with. And finally, one should not ignore that there are economic costs involved in the kind of situation that Turkey finds itself in.
What do you make of President Vladimir Putin of Russia effectively pulling out of Syria?
Well, sometimes stories are related to each other. And in this case, the Russian involvement in Syria has effectively closed off a lot of options that Turkey used to have, one of which is intervening militarily beyond its border. Even if Putin withdraws his forces, and we have to wait and see that he does so, he will have guaranteed that Assad survives, which is something that Turkey has not wanted, and as Turkey's been backing opposition groups in order to force his ouster, and that looks unlikely, and that puts additional burdens on Turkish foreign policy.
What's next for Turkey?
Unclear. It's one of those periods where, analysis does not allow you to look beyond the next day. well, I can safely predict, and I hope I'm wrong, that there'll be further terrorist outrages in Turkey. But beyond that, whether Turkey manages to cope with this threat and return to the stability that it enjoyed previously, it's not easy to say at this particular moment.
Is the government doing enough to protect its people?
Well, that's a question that's being raised because, after the last attack that you and I talked about, the government talked about a new security system that was going to ensure that it was not going to happen again. And yet, here we are again talking about the same kind of outrage. So there are pressures are building up on the government to actually try and ensure the safety of the people, not just out in the countryside, but in its own capital.
All right, Bulent Aliriza, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, as always, for your time.
Thank you for having me.